Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants of the European Forum for Disaster Risk Reduction, we are very delighted to welcome you to our side event on scaling up disaster risk reduction in civil protection and healthcare. My name is Christian Resch. I'm managing a knowledge network in Austria in the area of DRR research. It is my pleasure to chair this session together with Professor Dilanti Amaratunga from the University of Huddersfield, UK, who holds the chair for disaster risk management and also leads the Global Disaster Resilience Center. Both of us, we are members of the UNDRR European Science and Technology Advisory Group, and we are happy to introduce you into this session, which will start with a keynote on challenges and opportunities in an emerging and changing disaster risk landscape. And following an interesting discussion of our panel members representing a broad audience of DRR stakeholders. You are kindly invited to join this discussion also by using the Q&A tab on your right-hand side of the hopping screen. DRR is a collective responsibility. The devastating impacts of COVID-19 around the world illustrate that the nature and scale of disaster risk has changed. Extending beyond individual sectors, the diverse effects have cascaded into socioeconomic implications. While disasters, complexity and uncertainty are continuously growing, disaster risks are becoming an increasingly challenging and ambitious problem to deal with. With our session, we want to raise awareness about the initiatives at EU level to connect knowledge holders addressing an emerging and changing risk landscape, identifying also gaps COVID-19 has exposed in terms of the complexity and nonlinear nature of systemic risk, communicating evidence and lessons from the wide variations of the impacts of COVID-19 to the civil protection domain, and shaping ways forward to facilitate the increasing complexity and interdependency of risks in DRR strategies and plans at national as well as local level. With this, I'm very happy to introduce our session keynote that will be addressed by Richard Haig. He is a professor of disaster resilience and co-director of the University of Huddersfield's Global Disaster Resilience Center. Richard, thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon, Christian, and thank you for that generous introduction. And it's a pleasure to be invited to contribute to this important side event. And I suppose my role is to provide some brief context, especially with regards to some of the challenges that we're facing in this emerging and more complex risk landscape, but also where some of the opportunities may arise in how we can address them. So, of course, over the last 18 months, as Christian highlighted, we've seen a lot of reference to this dynamic and complex risk landscape. And the current pandemic has exposed a wide range of vulnerabilities in our society, and the consequences have extended far beyond direct health impacts. However, understanding that disaster risk is becoming more complex is in a kind of globalized, highly connected world, it's not new. It's not a new insight. Over the last 20 years, we've seen growing recognition of the need for new structures to govern risk so that we're able to live in and with uncertainty. For example, back in 2003, an OECD report presented an interdisciplinary and coherent concept of systemic risks. And the report assumes that a risk becomes systemic when a society's essential systems, such as telecoms, infrastructures, healthcare, are potentially threatened. Of course, we can also look at, within maybe the economic sphere, the terms emergent or systemic risk have long been used, especially in events surrounding the 2008 financial crisis. And of course, more recently, the Sustainable Development Goals presented an integrated and indivisible balancing of the three dimensions of sustainable development: economic, social, and environmental. And similarly, the Sendai framework reflects the certainty that in an ever more populous, networked, and globalized society, the very nature and scale of risk has changed. But what are some of the specific challenges that this emerging risk landscape poses? So let's just look at a few of them in more detail. Of course, a major issue is the complex interdependencies that occur within our tightly coupled urban systems. So when analysed in isolation, I think most natural hazards do not meet the characteristics of systemic risk. The damage is often proportional to the energy release, the impacts are local, the relationships are deterministic, and people are aware of these hazards based on experiences in the past. However, over time, most natural hazards must be seen in the context of much wider vulnerabilities. And for example, we've seen, like we have in the pictures of Jakarta, the increased urban development pressure that we see in many cities around the world leads to the poorest in society and those with the lowest adaptive capacity settling in hazard-prone areas, such as informal settlements in natural floodplains. And in turn, of course, this development can destroy the very wetlands that have previously formed a protective ecosystem and mitigated the risks of flooding. Now, in the case of Jakarta, groundwater extraction linked to this development and due to inadequate water supply have lowered the city's foundations and left it far more exposed to sea level rise and future flooding events. Now, of course, some of you will also be familiar with the multiple breadbasket failure example that's cited in the 2019 Global Assessment Report, particularly around the threat to global food security. And of course, Christian's already highlighted the issue of the COVID-19 pandemic, which we can all relate to because it's so fresh in our minds, which stretches across all areas of our society, fundamentally changing our health systems, our communities, our livelihoods, our economies, our cultural systems, and our environment. So these examples illustrate that although systemic risks originate in one subsystem of society or the environment, they're non-linear in their cause and effect relationships. And the ripple effects of these risks affect all subsystems, such as the economy, politics, and civil society. Now, of course, another aspect that we need to point out is the highly interconnected world means that disaster risks are also increasingly transboundary. Their modes of action surpass national or subnational boundaries, thus calling for a multi-layered governance approach. And we can see this, of course, in our approach to managing river basins across administrative or international borders. But of course, in that case, the natural hazard is in a fixed locality. But when we look at some of the more recent examples, the COVID-19 virus does not respect administrative borders, and many administrations have grappled with the challenges associated with varying levels of health protocols, travel restrictions across borders, even when they're within their own countries. And of course, in the past few weeks, we've seen tensions rise as several thousand migrants have been stranded along the border between Poland and Belarus. And these migrants have come from countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria, while their intended destination could be any number of countries in Europe. And we also saw the terrible scenes yesterday in the English Channel. So understanding different layers of displacement risk, the type and the scale of displacement that may occur at different levels and frequency is extremely challenging because there are so many interrelated factors influencing them. Now, despite the evident need to address these types of challenges, a recent report by the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies in Potsdam noted that systemic risks are often underestimated in public policy arenas due to the uncertainties of when it will occur or the potential extent of the damage. And many systemic risks are public knowledge and perceived as highly relevant, yet very little action is taken to get to the root of the problem. And we've seen this with the concerns expressed about the lack of action at the recent COP26 event, which despite climate change being seen as an existential threat and could leave humans in a drastically inferior situation, many of the public were frustrated at the lack of concrete action. And similarly, when we look at issues at the top of European citizens' concerns, concerns around immigration and migration often feature very prominently, and the response by many countries has been to heighten security and protect borders, which does little to allay citizens' concerns, and more importantly, doesn't really tackle the underlying cause of the displacement or the challenges of how to integrate people more effectively. So I briefly discussed the complexity of disaster risk that's growing and that the policy response is often seen as inadequate. Now, a recent UN report has again stressed the need for a systemic response in both national and local strategies. This and other calls have not gone without notice, and we're now starting to see some more practical guidance emerge. For example, this year, we've seen the Australian Institute for Disaster Resilience release its first handbook on systemic disaster risk, very much aimed at government and other actors. Now, I haven't got time to go into the details of this report or other emerging scientific studies. However, many of them recognise that there are opportunities to scale up our efforts to tackle the increasing complexity of disaster risk. For example, we need to move from being reactive to more proactive. And the temptation is to reflect on past experiences, as systemic risks are typically very obvious in retrospect. But this complexity obscures their workings and inhibits extrapolation from the past to the future. So we might need to look at models or scenario building to sketch out the non-linear nature of systemic risks. We must also embrace uncertainty and acknowledge that building resilience involves making timely decisions based on having good, but not always perfect information, and instead focus on an improved understanding of the resilience capacities of communities, institutions, and systems. We need to treat resilience as capacity building and take a community level, place-based approach to understand where risk is realized. And we've seen examples like this with the resilience hazard assessment that takes a holistic perspective of shocks and stresses within a specific place or community. And of course, we need to fit the governance to the characteristics of the decision context and clarify roles and responsibilities for risk assessment, ownership, and management. A multi-agency approach is very much required. I'd better finish there due to time limitations, but hopefully it's provided for some context for later discussions. I'll therefore hand back to Christian. Thank you.
Yes, so as you were mentioning, we live in a highly interconnected world that makes preparing for and responding to disasters and needs of knowledge of risk and a well-oiled collaboration and a multi-skilled approach across different sectors and domains. And COVID-19, as you stressed out, the pandemic showed that also training, research and innovation, as well as close cooperation between national civil protection authorities and healthcare emergency services, universities, as well as researchers are essential elements for a thorough prevention and preparedness activities across Europe. And with this, we want to initiate our panel discussion of this session, where we are going to address what gaps have been identified through COVID-19 to address systemic risk in civil protection and the healthcare domain, but also what is needed to improve in terms of implementing the evidence lessons we took from the wide variations in the impacts of COVID-19, as well as how can national and local DRR strategies, as well as response plans, be developed to address the increased complexity. I'm very delighted to introduce with this our four distinguished panelists, starting with Felix Bloch. He is head of unit for knowledge network and evidence-based policy at the European Commission, DG ECHO, and was in charge for the legislative initiative to strengthen the Union Civil Protection Mechanism, meaning RescEU. Our second panelist is Barbara Hinterstoiser. She's a professor for physical chemistry at the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences, Vienna, and also founding member of the Women Exchange for DRR network. Our third panelist is Mirnesa Softic from the Ministry of Security of Bosnia and Herzegovina. She is a national contact point for cooperation with the EU Civil Protection Mechanism and is engaged in the overall coordination of international and also domestic assistance during the COVID-19 pandemic. And finally, Hannes Kern, he's a civil protection expert from the Austrian Fire Services, and he was also assistant professor at the University of Leoben and knows the interfaces between the different domains very well. With this distinguished colleagues and panelists, I would just give the floor to our first panelist, Felix, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christian. Great to be here. Thank you for the introduction. And indeed, let me start maybe on a happy note, slightly ironic one. You know, the good news is that we're in business as a DRM community. Thanks to the coronavirus, thanks to climate change, thanks to the heat and the rain, we have huge challenges ahead of us, and that keeps us busy. And let's look at that in a positive way. But indeed, these are, of course, the problems. We know all that, and conferences like these, of course, led to repetitions of you know, similar things in different words, but we're all aware of that, of these huge challenges, and we all know that there are no magic bullets. In any case, I don't have one, and I do not know anyone, not even in Brussels, who does have a magic bullet. And as we nowadays say, if anybody in the audience has a magic bullet, please use the Q&A tab, the chat function, and let us know. But that is just the challenge, that there are no easy answers to these challenges. Now, the Sendai framework actually provides an excellent, and I would perhaps even say visionary, reference point to confront those challenges. And this is why it's actually important, and not just another paper or another international process, but a really important one. And I actually took the time to look at it again, and I recommend us to look at it, you know, maybe more often than we usually do in our busy schedules. And as I want to talk about the Union Civil Protection Mechanism Knowledge Network, which is a new component of the EU Union Civil Protection Mechanism, I find that this process and Sendai connect extremely well. And let me explain why. The Sendai framework stresses the shared responsibility between central and local authorities, sectors, and stakeholders, and the need to collaborate between sectors. As is pointed out, disaster risk reduction is a collective responsibility. So better collaboration between those actors, and we see that during the pandemic, we saw that during the pandemic, and we're still seeing it today, is essential. And Sendai also recognizes that while increase of knowledge is necessary, there is already a lot of knowledge across stakeholders that needs to be managed effectively and leveraged. Hence, partnerships as bedrock for disaster management. It is crucial for our better understanding of disaster risk to promote and improve dialogue. So all of that is really very well said, and it's all Sendai. And I don't expect anybody to disagree with that. But what do we do to actually make that happen? And here is one initiative launched within the EU framework that intends to make a contribution. The Union Civil Protection Knowledge Network is such a new initiative that the European Commission has been preparing together with EU member states and stakeholders. So not only, you know, Europeans in their home offices in Brussels on our own, but in constant dialogue with member states and stakeholders. And this knowledge network will be launched by Commissioner Janez Lenarčič just in a few days on the 7th of December. And I would like to extend a cordial invite to all of you to join, despite understandable online conference fatigue. Everybody is welcome to join on the 7th of December. And the motto of that knowledge network is connect, share, grow. And I think this is also what Sendai stipulates. More collaboration and knowledge sharing is needed. The knowledge network will offer to bring many different strands of work, like civil protection exercises, training, exchange of experts, lessons learned. You know, these are components that we already know in the Union Civil Protection Mechanism. But the knowledge network will bring all of that together as one common UCPM learning and knowledge space, and linking up not only with member states, of course, and regional entities in member states, but also with other commission departments, because I know all too often we don't talk to our, even don't talk to our closest colleagues inside our own departments. So that is something that we're also aiming at. So the knowledge network will offer an IT online collaborative platform where partnerships can be cultivated and reinforced. In fact, at the Commission, we are quite excited about it, because we already now see a huge interest, and we hear from many corners that this is really the missing piece that will bring the various EU activities closer together and also making them more visible. And I'm limited to 5 minutes max, so I want to be short and stick to the timeline. And you may now think that I haven't actually responded to the question. Well, I think I have in my own way. And one key answer is that we need more and enhanced collaboration and silo breaking. And this is precisely what the knowledge network intends to address. So this knowledge network will be launched very soon, and obviously it is essential that it is fed with the knowledge and is supported by the communities and stakeholders. So there again, my invitation not only to join us on the 7th of December, but beyond, to tune into the knowledge network and make your contributions in your respective fields of action to the knowledge network, so that it can be shared for the benefit of Europe and beyond. Thank you so much, Christian. Back to you.
Thank you very much. And indeed, as you said, you were very well addressing the target questions we were choosing for this, or elaborating for this session. And I want to connect to what you said on breaking the silos and move to our next panelist, which is Barbara Hinterstoiser. And maybe beforehand, we were choosing very wisely the panelists in order to address the different policy areas and domains and stakeholders. And Barbara is not only professor at the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences, she was also many years a vice rector, as well as since I think more than 15 years also in operational civil protection service with the Rescue Dogs organization. And with that, not only her scientific work is connected to DRR, but also her let's say a volunteer engagement. And with this, I want to hand over to you on where you see also with the knowledge network as well, opportunities from the scientific perspective. Barbara, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Christoph. First of all, greetings from home office in Salzburg, a countryside in Austria, which is now very deep in the COVID-19 crisis. And what I recognized, and this is my introduction, well, people recognize the importance of collective responsibility, but they recognize it and they act like being responsible for everything if it comes to floods, to avalanches, to storms. to disasters which are visible. And the problem with COVID-19 at the moment is that viruses are not visible. Maybe some of you remember Chernobyl. People in Austria had problems to accept that there is a danger coming up as radioactivity. You cannot smell, you cannot see it, you can't hear it. And this is the same with the virus. So our senses are not made to recognize such dangers. And people maybe just recognize what's going on in the healthcare. But what's coming up is, should we believe in science? Should we believe in what researchers say? Or is it better to listen to what we read on Facebook and so? And one problem, I always see this gap between people from the street and what we are doing at the university in our maybe bubble, kind of bubble. It was, I think, at least in Austria, a disaster that Facebook and Twitter and so on had been much faster in providing news and I say stupid comments than the research-based news. So how to give people more confidence in science, how to avoid that people just follow the rumors, what we call bush drums and fake news, and don't believe in evidence-based data. One problem I see is that responsible scientists are used to tell their results with all uncertainties. So they say, yeah, it might develop like that, the possibility is in percentage and so on. Whereas fake news people say black or white, never gray. This is easier to be taken or to believed by people, not trusting in science. We, especially in Austria, we have a big problem here. As its roots, people don't understand it really, why scientists do not paint in black and white. And if we look back in history, it's quite interesting. If you look in the vaccination history, the vaccination against smallpox, measles, polio, when they were introduced, there were also demonstrations and a lot of discussions around. But this was a long time ago, and it seems we have not learned so much. And this leads me to education, especially at universities. We should provide, of course, sound basic education. This is more for the side of the schools, I would say. And then we have to continue that at the universities. We should provide knowledge, even the topic of lifelong learning appears then, for school teachers, for other multipliers. Information, information, information. We have to pick up people where they stand. It's nice to have networks. It's nice to connect each other. But we really have to find the communication to the people on the street. And it's really, well, also what was already mentioned, disasters do not care about political borders. And it doesn't matter if it's from district to district, from country to country. So networking and communication and to talk to each other, to connect, to share, to grow, as we heard before, is very, very important. But please never forget about the people on the street. And therefore, I like conferences like we have here, which bring people together from different disciplines and countries, because we need the holistic thinking, the systemic thinking. And what I just want to point out, for example, a setting I like very much. This is a setting of the Austrian Association for Snow and Avalanches. They have monthly meetings, and well, this is nice to do at the moment with the digitalization. This is the positive part of COVID, let's say. They have monthly meetings with webinars from mountain guides, snow researchers, avalanche experts, and so on. So a quite mixed community. And this helps really a lot in the mutual understanding, which we really urgently need. So this, I think, is the message I want to give. Mutual understanding. We have to bring the people on the research side, so on the evidence data side. Because if we leave the gap as it is at the moment between research and between fake news, we will lose. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara, for your statement and view from a university perspective, where I just want to conclude and connect it to the Civil Protection Knowledge Network initiative that Felix was mentioning. That will definitely be not only opportunity, it will be a mechanism that an inclusive mechanism that will definitely help and support and facilitate the scientific community to create a mutual understanding and an opportunity to connect with the different stakeholders. And now I would be interested to hear it from a practical and also more policy point of view from Mirnesa. She is working in the Ministry of Security in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and was involved during or within this pandemic in the coordination of national and international response and assistance, and as Barbara also addressed the dimension of media. So Mirnesa, we are happy to hear your point of view in this discussion.
Yes, good afternoon, dear colleagues. It is my really pleasure to be today here with you. Today we celebrate the National Day, so basically I'm celebrating this special day for my country and for myself together with you today. So in my presentation, I will primarily focus on the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, practical response of Bosnia and Herzegovina to the COVID pandemic, especially in the first months since the outbreak. Within our documents, risk assessment in Bosnia and Herzegovina, infection disease has been identified as a representative risk. However, the manner of pandemic management, leadership, and institutional accountability is somehow insufficiently stipulated in existing legislation. The health system in Bosnia and Herzegovina is developed in such a way that institutions are decentralized, since the country is decentralized. In some parts, there is an overlapping of the competencies of an institution operating at a different level of the government, and this was one of the main reasons for the lack of systematic response in the first day of pandemic. Healthcare workers identified as a first response for the pandemic were not enough educated to act in the crisis situation. For instance, planning, the resource allocation, etc. In addition, insufficient investment has been made in education of the population on prevention of infection disease, as well as how to deal with them. In this process, I will try to link now the civil protection system, protection and rescue system, to the healthcare system. An example of my ministry and our roles in this process. So even though we didn't have the direct competencies, the Ministry of Security had to take over to the coordinating role on responding to the pandemic, and we proposed to the Council of Ministers of Bosnia and Herzegovina to declare the state of natural or other disaster in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which was adopted on the session of the Council of Ministers 17 March 2020, which is basically the beginning of pandemic. So this decision somehow give us a space to activate the also coordination body of Bosnia and Herzegovina for protection and rescue from natural and other disaster. In accordance with the above-mentioned decision, the Ministry of Security could activate also the plan for protection and rescue in order to determine the organization, activations, and operations, determine the tasks and competencies, human resources, etc., to deal with this disaster. We started to carry out the vertical and horizontal coordination within different ministries at the national level, such as the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Civil Affairs, which is in charge for the health sector in the country, Foreign Affairs, Indirect Taxation Authority, Border Police, headquarters of civil protection at the lower level of organization of the countries, but also to the international community, such as delegation of the European Union, UNDP office, other international organizations, embassies, diplomatic and consular mission in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Due to limited resources and impossibility to procure protective equipment, we also were forced, the Council of Ministry, to issue a decision on requesting international assistance for the protection and rescue, which was sent out to the ERCC to request assistance from the civil protection mechanism, but also through a NATO ERCC mechanism and on bilateral basis. With adaptation of this decision and declaring state of natural and other disaster at a different level, somehow we gave a space to enable easier and faster action of various institutions in the field of protection and rescue in response to pandemic, comparing to the situation that we had before declared the state of emergency. Also, it is important to mention the role of international organizations and institutions operating in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The legislation that regulates the field of procurement was not adjusted to act in emergency situation, and that's why thus it was almost impossible to procure medical supplies on time. And significant role was played by UNDP in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which through the donor funds from the EU and other organizations were procured medical equipment and funds that were listed on the list of needs by BH institution. In addition, UNDP procured the medical equipment and supply, as well as protective equipment for the health facilities from the governmental approved funding. So this was a good example of cooperation and action of all institutions and organizations, both domestic and international, in situation of natural and other disaster, which through joint action can make significant progress in response to the crisis. So the ongoing COVID-19 crisis has significantly tested the country's emergency preparedness and response capacity. This real-time situation provides opportunity to record good practice, identify the challenges, and learn for the future events. In general, knowledge management has been identified as a problem in existing systems. Recording and analyzing of current events could provide the first attempt to foster a better knowledge management system, with its results providing information on which to base future training and exercise. In forthcoming period, it will be necessary to strengthen the capacity for early warning system, which Bosnia and Herzegovina has established within the frame of international health regulation of the World Health Organization, early detection, assessment, event reporting, rapid public health response, and coordination of 4 relevant health institutions, as well as taking preventive measures to prevent spread and reduce the burden of disease. Also, we need, what we identified, that we need to improve vaccine procurement procedure in the coming days. Improving the communication and coordination of the public health sector, civil protection, police, military, including the media, and adaptation of the plans and standard operating procedure is a key segment of response to prevent and combat the spread of infection disease, but also this can be a good example for any other disaster that we may face in the future. That would be all from my side.
Thank you, Mirnesa. That was very nicely pointing out, especially when it comes to bridging the different governance levels as well as sectors, and the COVID pandemic is a crisis that is creating a huge demand, a necessary need to bridge those sectors. I want to point out one thing that you were mentioning at last, which is the communication. Where I just want to move to our fourth panelist, Hannes. You are since many years already involved, as well as in the scientific, as well as in the branch of a first responder. And sometimes with COVID-19, as a civilian, if you look at scientific communication and the reactions of parts of the population out there, one can identify that there is also, and Barbara was mentioning that already when it comes to the education sector, that there is also a bigger need for science literacy in the broader population, to understand the role of science, the communication, uncertainty that comes with scientific communication. So from your point of view, where do you see needs to improve the implementation of evidence lessons that we took from the variations of the impact of COVID-19?
Thanks, Christian, on the forehand for the nice introduction, and also for the question, more or less pinpointing out the situation we also see in the field of civil protection and emergency response. As you well described, there are two hearts beating in my chest. The one is the scientific side, which I'm very much acquainted to, and the other side is also the response side, and also in terms of prevention and preparedness, of course. In terms of the systemic risk and COVID-19 as we saw it, of course, there are some obvious points like low-hanging fruit, stockpiling, and so on, which seems complex as such. But when you look at it, this is quite obvious to one who is doing prevention and preparedness work, that you can do more there. But as Barbara Hinterstoess pointed out, there is a thing that's a little bit deeper in the system, and that's could become and is already a problem when we are dealing also in the emergency response or in the response sector with people working there who need to understand our basic goals and our basic approaches. When we are talking about risks in the civil protection also, then this is a term where, let's say, the cracks and let's say the people who are working with it are very well acquainted with. But for us, it's also a question within our community of emergency responders: how good are we at sharing what we are specifically addressing with risk, how these risks are developed, these pictures are developed, these data sets are developed, and how good are we sharing this knowledge also to our policymakers and to our politicians, for example. Look at the situation of COVID-19 or any other pandemics, which are well known with all of the experts that are dealing with these fields. Let's talk about SARS, let's talk about other epidemics. But why did we fail in communicating which large risk this is to the people who are making policy are non-experts? So this is also a thing where we're touching a word which you mentioned, which is science literacy. And it's not only the public that's here in the boat with it. As emergency responders and civil protection people are people from the public. This problem is also transferred to our organizations, and so this is very important. And an evidence for this might be if you look at vaccination rates, for example, at the medical personnel, where we are having very much struggle with it, especially here in Austria, to see what the outcomes and the strength of sciences are. We are able to provide a vaccination in a very short time. How can people trust in this, also from our own organizations? So this is not only a question for the public. This is a systemic risk for all of us. It touches all of our fields of work, and this does also touch us as experts in civil protection and emergency response for this part. Yeah, so I think for us it's very, very important, and it has to do something with education. It has to do something how also we in our civil protection units are dealing with scientific knowledge. And there I come to a very, very important thing when we are talking about the needs. Felix Bloch addressed it very, very good. We need much, much more connection between our community, but also other stakeholders. Yeah. So sharing of knowledge, the knowledge networks, all the things that are launched here in this field are very, very important to build up resilience within also the civil protection community. We need to adjust to many, many different risks that might be also not talk about the obvious ones, yeah, like droughts or wildfires that we have experienced them here in Austria also, but talk also about black swans that we don't have on our mind here. The only chance to be able to adapt very, very quickly is to have here a scientific knowledge within our community and understanding about the risks and strong networks. Yeah, there is a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge out there also in our community and also in other acquainted communities, and we need these knowledge bases to be able to quickly respond to situations that come up. And this builds a resilience not only in the society, but also in our field of emergency response. And then I addressed the things of what's needed within the policy sector. Yeah, I think it's the basis for this is, as Barbara Hinterstoesser said, is a good basis in science literacy, education, and also in our organizations. Let's say, what do I mean? Emergency response and civil protection organizations. There, I think we have to do more in implement those basic principles of science, of knowledge sharing. And for the policymakers, let's build the basis for such networks. It's very, very important to include and have strong basis for such networks. DCNA is one example here in Austria, but I think we need much more of such initiatives to have a stronger connection and a better resilience against threats that come up in future. And then also threats like maybe connected to hybrid threats, or Barbara Hinterstoesser addressed it, social media and so on, where a lot of things are around that maybe with a little bit more understanding of some situations would not pop up that great. Yeah, so these are very more or less the facts that I'd like to address within this context. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hannes. Very, very nicely said. With this, I also want to once more highlight the opportunity for our participants to use the Q&A tab. So our panel will gladly also be engaged with you and answer the relevant questions. So just shoot us a question. And with that, I also want to hand over now to my co-chair, Dilanti, who will be now include some more questions and also will then be doing the wrap up of our panel. We still have some 10 more minutes. Dilanti.
Thank you very much, Christian. Thank you very much. I think it was a very, very thought-provoking discussion. So it was actually very well framed around the key questions. So what I want to actually now raise is, I suppose, perhaps I think around the civil protection angle, actually, Christian. For example, I think maybe one of the panelists can address this. For example, I suppose, how from the civil protection point of view, how can COVID-19 be incorporated within the overall risk framework? You know, any examples that can be discussed?
Thank you for the question. As I mentioned in my statement, we need to, in the future, to improve the cooperation between the health sector and the civil protection authorities, and this has to be part of or planning documents that we are developing within the countries. At the moment, at least in my country, the health workers, the people who are engaged in the health sector were not enough educated on the crisis management. So these things need to be improved, and we need to start, even though the most of the risk assessment documents in the country somehow treat the risk of pandemic, and it is developed at some point. There is no clear, I would say, systematical approach how to deal with this type of crisis, since it's not just the health issue, but also it has influence on all other things in our society, including the social impacts, including the economic, etc. So as we could learn from the experience that we had in the last 2 days, 2 years for now, we can see how this question needs to be addressed and very well treated within the strategies, planning documents, risk assessment, etc. I hope I managed to answer your question.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe to add on top of this, I would not say, and your question was heading towards this, how can we include the pandemic into the overall risk picture or the strategies? It was never out as far as I see it. Yeah, it was always there. Read the national risk assessments of the last 10 or 20 years. Pandemics was always high on top of this. Yeah, but the question I would ask here: why did we fail in communicate the risk? It is there. We displayed it everywhere. Yeah, you can look at the risk matrices and everyone would see it. Yeah, how high ranking are these risks? Yeah, but the question is, how did we fail in are not being able to communities to communicate this to policymakers, to the healthcare sector, as you mentioned, yeah, to other stakeholders, and the public. Yeah, so this is the question I would see. It is not the question of being in or out. It was always in, yeah, but we're failing in communicating it. Yeah, so that's what I would see here. Yeah, and that's where we need to work, definitely. Also within our own civil protection sector, yeah? It's not out of the business. Yeah, also here we were more or less flashed in some areas by the pandemics, which was always in. Yeah, it was never out. It was always a risk to be considered. Yeah.
Well, maybe to add, yes, I agree completely. It was always in, but as I said in the beginning already, it's an invisible enemy which we are fighting against. And then we have numbers in TV and just telling us statistics, and just if you speak to the healthcare people, then you get a clue about what's going on. And so many people think, oh yeah, it won't touch me. I'm out of this system. And there I really see the gap between what we transferring or what communicate to what we tell people, how we communicate with the people, and how we prepare them. I think we will have a kind of similar problem when it comes to the topic blackout. This is also something which is just mysterious somewhere in the back. But fires, floods, avalanches, this is something real you can see and you can recognize. But this stupid virus as radioactivity, you have no senses for that. And therefore you can just say, it's not here with me. Just thinking about my situation at the moment, I'm in a nice building. You see the background, and I can, yeah, it looks very relaxing, but I know I have to be aware of this situation we have with COVID. But many people are not aware, and we see that when we see how people behave, still behave, and are just thinking about where to go for holiday and where to go skiing and so on. So it's not in the mindset of the people. What is a pandemic? What in the hell is it? So it's really about communication, and this is something that researchers have to learn how to transfer their knowledge to the people from the street. There's a huge gap still.
Christian, if I may add to that, because I couldn't agree more with what Professor Hinterstoesser and also Hannes just said. I think from a Commission perspective, we've been looking at risk assessments by member states for many years, and the pandemic was consistently there. Other like blackouts that was mentioned, industrial accidents, CBRN incidents, they're all there. I think probably in the pandemic we had a particular challenge in that, you know, it was a health emergency, and maybe civil protection agencies and health authorities do not cooperate as well as they should in general, and this is certainly something that is being addressed now and needs to be addressed. The Commission President has proposed the establishment of a health emergency response agency at EU level to bring the health sector, or make the health sector better prepared for similar events in the future. But I think the communication point that was referred to earlier to the wider public, I think is really important. And having worked with the political level in the past, I think it's just natural that politicians, the higher level, the governments, do not like to scare their people. They would not like to remind people at all times, you know, that you know there could be a nuclear incident tomorrow. You know, we don't like to hear that, and I don't like to hear that. I definitely want to think about my next skiing and holiday plan than thinking about you know, the potential blackout and the disaster that are potentially around the corner. So I think this is really a very important point, how to communicate risk better. And from a European Commission perspective, I'm afraid there is not a lot I can contribute on that particular point, because communication needs to be as local as possible and as regional as possible. I do not believe that you know, Europe-wide campaigns are a very pertinent tool in that respect. I think this needs to be as local as possible, and I'm a strong believer in the subsidiarity principle in that respect. I think the EU level can do a lot in terms of connecting agencies, national agencies, you know, the professionals, but vis-a-vis the citizens, I think member states are better placed. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that intervention. I think all of you addressed that issue very well. I think we are sort of spot on as far as the time is concerned, but in terms of sort of summarizing the key points, takeaway points from this session is, of course, I think I can identify 3 key points. The first one is, of course, you know, the session actually identified the gaps and also the importance of promoting a better understanding of the multidimensional nature of risk, and also the role of civil protection in that domain. And also another area that was highlighted is the need to facilitate and promote the coherence of disaster risk reduction in the civil protection and the healthcare area, and thereby to develop a very good shared understanding. Also with the need to link the new research knowledge with practice, and also with the highlighting of new research areas that needs carrying out. So I think with that, I think we need to actually close our session. So thank you very much for the keynote speaker and also for the panelists. Thank you.